Okay, so thanks for having me. And I was asked earlier this year if I could have a talk at your safety event, and I was hoping to come meet you all in person, but unfortunately that was not really possible because of work. But at least I'm here. So I'm the Swedish representative in UAE Safety Commission. I normally work as a rope access technician and instructor, but I'm also a health and safety engineer, working with general health and safety, but more specifically work at heights stuff. I work with standards, mainly within the UAE Safety Commission, but also through the Swedish Standard Institute, and therefore also with the CERN, the European Standard Organization. I also, for a couple of years, used to be part of the Equipment and Standard Committee for IRATA, which is a trade organization for rope access. So my talk today will be maybe as short of an hour. It's regarding European PPE regulations or legislation. So everyone outside Europe, you don't need to listen if you don't want to. And actually, the legislation is for manufacturers. It's not for the users. This has nothing to do to your private use. It has something to do with products that being sold or given or put on the market, as it's called. I guess it's of interest for many others also outside of Europe, but the legislation is European. And when I say European, I mean the EU plus Switzerland and Norway. The general content will be some fundamentals of the definition. So this, again, will be the European definition. Could be different in other parts of the world. We're going to talk about the 3 categories that are defined. We're also going to have a short information about another legislation that's called General Product Safety Regulation and what that is. It's quite new. It came last year, this version. And then the big question, why my and many others evaluation that highline systems, why are they the product? Why are they PPE, to be considered PPE? Obviously, there is only a court or a judge ruling that could decide if something is PPE or not, but this is my take on this. And then we're going to talk some general things about the European standards and harmonized standards, just as an information. I'm glad to take questions during the talk. Maybe I don't see if you put your hand up or something. So anyone, Thomas or hi or someone, if you see that someone wants to ask a question, please let me know. I'll try to look for some hands as well. And I hope that we're going to have maybe 5-10 minutes at the end if there is any further questions or discussions. So first, the fundamentals. What is PPE? So PPE stands for personal protective equipment. And there are 3 parts to the definition within the European regulations. First part is the most obvious. So it's equipment designed and manufactured to be worn or held by a person for protection. So it's quite obvious for me as a rock climber. So my harness is something that I wear. So it gives me protection. When I'm at work, maybe as on the picture, I wear some respiratory protection. It's quite obvious that it's PPE as well. Next part of the definition is interchangeable components. So that would be, for example, this is a lanyard used in rope access and work at height. And you can, of course, change the actual rope part of it, but it's still one product. So it's an interchangeable component of one product. So any spare parts, more or less, is considered PPE by themselves. So also spare part needs to have the same quality control and everything as a full piece of PPE. And the third part of the definition is connection systems for equipment that is referred in point A that are not held or worn by a person, that are designed to connect that equipment to an external device or to a reliable anchor point. And for me as a rope access technician, that could be this tripod. It's an external connection system, something that I anchor my harness through a rope to the tripod or quadpod. Same with the normal anchor sling, as in the right picture. I'm never going to hold it by my hand or wear it when it's in use, but it's still part of the definition. And this is the baseline for why PPE also would be a highline slackline system, where you connect the harness through a lanyard, your leash. Then, of course, since it's going to be something that you anchored to, and as we see in the last part of the definition here, not designed to be permanently fixed. And that's obvious with our highline slackline systems. So this is the definition. We're going to come back to the last part of the definition again later, but that is the basics of it. Then, yes, for knowledge, there is a few exceptions that is not considered PPE, and equipment that is only for military and police use, it's excluded. Equipment used for self-defense, equipment for private use against weather or water during dishwashing, and buoyancy aids that you use or that you have on seagoing vessels and airplanes. Those are excluded because they are in global definitions and legislation, not just European. And the same goes with motorcycle helmets. They are also regulated globally, and therefore they are excluded from the European legislation. And this is well specified in the regulation itself. You can read it. It's easy to understand. So the CE mark, you've probably seen this maybe on a harness or other type of climbing equipment, but we can also see CE marks on many types of products around us. There is, I think, 30, 40, maybe 50 different European regulations that demand a CE mark on the product. So the CE mark itself doesn't say that something is personal protective equipment. The CE mark is there is a way for the manufacturer to ensure that the product conforms to all the relevant legislation. So if you have a simple plastic toy, it will only have, the CE mark will only reference to the regulations on toys. But if it would be an electronic toy, then there is also some regulation on electronics. So then the CE mark will reference to both those, both the toy legislation and the electronic legislation. So the CE mark is the way for the manufacturer to show that they have that they fulfill every relevant legislation. It is allowed to sell a product without the CE mark if it's so small or it's made up in a way that it's impossible to have the mark on it, and then it needs to be on packaging and documents. But that's very uncommon for our types of products. And then, sorry, and then for PPE in category 3, the CE mark should be followed with a 4-digit number. As you can see in the left, lower left corner, there's a CE mark with some numbers. And this identification number is to identify the notified body, that is a type of test institute or lab that will control the production facilities and the quality management system of the production.
Can you, could you please, because you're referring to PPE category 3, could you please shortly tell us what's the difference between category 1, 2, and 3?
I will in just a couple of slides.
Sorry.
But it's always hard to know what to put first, because if I do that first, then it's not, why do we have this? But yeah, it's coming. Thanks. So there is different levels, different demands on the three different categories. And for category 3, you need to have these additional identification numbers together with the CE mark. So the legislation that we talk about is called the PPE regulation. And as I already mentioned, it regulates all personal protective equipment that is made available on the market. So that means it's not just when it's sold brand new, but also if you have an activity where you lend equipment to someone, or if you rent equipment, let's say indoor climbing gym that rents harnesses to visitors, the regulation applies. So this regulation applies every time a product is being made available for the consumer, not just if you pay for it. There is it defines what is called economic operators, which is it defines the responsibilities if you're a manufacturer, which is the most important, but also if you import equipment from, let's say, a North American manufacturer to Europe, then you as an importer have almost the same responsibilities as a manufacturer, and so on. It regulates a lot of different things, but some of the most important is quality control of production, instructions to use, markings, and something that's called essential health and safety requirements. And I'm going to come back to the essential health and safety requirements in a few seconds. And there is a few things that many people think are personal protective equipment, but falls outside the definition. And one is fixed anchors, and that could be fixed anchors for slacklining, for industrial rope access, for rock climbing, it doesn't matter. But fixed anchors, since they are installed with a tool and permanent, they fall out outside the definition. Manual descenders and belay device used in recreational climbing is also outside the scope, because they don't give protection by themselves. You need to intervene as a user and hold the rope at all times to have a function, and therefore they are also outside the definition. The essential health and safety requirements within this regulation, it defines different aspects that needs to be controlled by the manufacturer, and it's also these things that the notified body, the lab, should control when they test the product. You do have to remember that it's the exact same regulation that that is used for all types of PPE. So if I have some knee pads used for skateboarding, that's the same regulation as a respiratory protection that a firefighter uses. So it doesn't differentiate between private use and industrial or commercial use. It doesn't differentiate between sporting and work or the safety levels. These essential health and safety requirements are for everything. And there are, under the headline of design principles, there is parts regarding ergonomics. So for a harness, a clothing, or a helmet, they must be ergonomic and possible to adapt to the user or be adjusted to the user. And then on the design principles, they also talk about levels and classes of protection. I can see that as similar maybe to the different categories as you have in webbing within the Slackline standards. So it could be different protection levels because of different scenarios and different risks. And then we have inoculant essence of PPE that more or less means that there should not be any risk from the PPE itself. So you're not allowed to have PPE with some sharp edges or burrs that can be dangerous or uncomfortable. And also the comfort and effectiveness, that equipment should be light and strong. You should be able to adapt it to your body, and it should be compatible with different types of PPE and so on. So this is of course very different depending on what type of PPE we're talking about, and all of this is not relevant for, let's say, rock climbing equipment or slacklining equipment. This is very general, that it regulates all types of PPE. And then, and last important part, the instruction and information, the user instructions. There is a lot of specific regulations on this. So I just briefly mentioned that on the CE mark, if there is a 4-digit number afterwards, that reference to PPE category 3. So we have 3 categories where the lowest category is PPE protecting you from very small things. PPE that you more or less there won't be any real risk to not use it. So typically some garden gloves or sunglasses is PPE category 1. Then we have a really big category, that's category 2, and that's almost everything. Because what they've done is that they define category 1 and category 3, and everything that's outside those 2 definitions falls in the middle to category 2. Any types of helmets, more or less, work helmets, bike helmets, kayak helmets, any type of helmets, both for work and for sport, is normally category 2. Different physical protection, gloves, knee pads, you name it, category 2. Category 3, anything that has something to do with height, protection against fall from height, is defined as category 3. Air defenders, also category 3. Chemical protection, category 3. Respiratory protection, electric shock protection, buoyancy aids like life vests, category 3. And then we have fixed anchors, as I mentioned before, is not PPE at all, so not within any of the categories, but still life supporting equipment, right? So if we have a bolted anchor for highline, slackline, of course that is just as important as the slackline itself, but it doesn't fall inside the PPE regulation in Europe. So this is the definition of category 1. One of these, if it's protection against one of these 5 subclauses: small mechanical injuries, low temperatures, sunlight, and so on. And then the definition of category 3, a bit more different defined risks, but it must be one of this for being category 3 PPE. And as you see, we have the G here, falling from height. So all recreational rock climbing, indoor climbing, alpinist equipment falls within this category. And all highlining, slacklining equipment should fall into the same category because of this falling from, it protects us from fall from height. The really big difference that could be interesting to know regarding this category is the controls of production. So there is 2 parts on controls, you can say. One is the design phase and one is the production phase. And if you see in the key below that the orange bits, then the conformity assessment or production control is evaluated or monitored by a notified body. A notified body is that external lab that tests or controls stuff. So to compare to this ISA safety standards, where you have equipment being tested by an external lab, that is more similar to what we have a Category 2 here, that the design phase, that is testing the product, is being done by an external lab, but no one is controlling the production quality. So if you have a slackline manufacturer today that has a safety label for a slackline product, they have the product tested at a lab, but there is nothing that controls, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there is nothing to my knowledge that controls that the production has a safe and even quality. And this is something that is very important for the Category 3, is the production phase here, that there's two different ways to do it, but they are both mandatory to have controlled by an external notified body, control lab, so that you don't just test samples of the individual product, you also have a control that product today will be as safe as the product made 1 year ago. So that's a big difference. Then general product safety. So there's been general product safety other type of legislation before, but that's been quite weak legislation. This new product safety regulation came in place last year. I think it was sometime in December last year that it was implemented. And for Slackline situation, this more or less only applies to anchor bolts and for non-highline situations. So everything where you're not connected with a leash, then this regulation applies. I want to mention that this regulation is nothing that I'm as knowledgeable about, but I have some basic knowledge at least. Some general responsibilities from the manufacturer is that for every product before they put it on the market, they must do a risk assessment of that product. And when you do that risk assessment, you need to evaluate the type of use, possible misuse, who the user is going to be. Do we need to adapt the product depending on if it's only adults or adults and children that's going to use it, and so on and so on. So a quite thorough risk assessment is needed for a product, of course, depending on how complex the product is. There must be a technical file that describes the product and different aspects, technical aspects of the product. There must be markings on the product. Some of the markings that you must have on a product is manufacturer, address, batch number, etc. Once again, same as the CE mark that I mentioned before, if the markings can't be added on the product because of how the product physically is, like there is not enough room or it's hard to get the marking on, then you can have the marking on packaging and documents. But the normal case should be that you have manufacturer name, address, and then also some batch numbers and so on the actual product. You must leave some type of instruction for use, and of course that depends on how complex the product is, but there should be some information on how you use it correctly, and the instruction for use must be in the language defined by each receiving country. So within the European Union, each country itself defines if product must have instructions in their own language, or if it's okay with one or two or other languages and so on. But normally it's the main language of that country. So if you're going to sell slackline equipment, for example, to Sweden, the instruction for use must be in Swedish. Under this new regulation on general product safety, it's also mandatory for manufacturers to report dangerous products. to the European authorities and to the national authorities. And you also, as a manufacturer, need to investigate any complaints regarding safety and functionality. So there's some specific regulations about this. Yeah, and of course there's much more. It's 135 pages. So, but this is the main responsibilities for a manufacturer. So, to the big question, why are highline systems considered PPE? First off, we're going to jump back to the definition. So the third part of the definition says, as we saw earlier on, connection systems for equipment referred to in point A. And point A was equipment that you wear or hold to protect yourself. So as when you walk a highline, you wear a harness, and the connection system will be your leash to the anchorage system, which will be the slackline, right? So typically in highlines, you have a rock climbing harness, already certified PPE. You have a leash, normally constructed from a mountaineering type rope, which is already a certified PPE. But then the rest of it is normally not certified PPE. Maybe some individual components, but normally not. But they should be. So that full connection system is considered PPE if they are not designed to be permanently fixed and that they don't require fastening work. So if you have a system that every component needs to be torqued together with a wrench or something, and you kind of ditch the legislation, but anything that you put up in normal ways as you do with a highline, then it will fall within this definition. There is also quite a few examples of similar products that are already being, for many years and decades, being certified and CE marked as PPE Category 3 for fall protection. And the most similar products are these horizontal lifelines. It's important to understand that there are both temporary horizontal lifeline and permanent, and the permanent ones are not considered PPE. But for example, this wire system that we can see here from 3M is a temporary system, and you see his big hook connected to a ring, not extremely different from a leash system to a leash ring. Also similar to this temporary horizontal lifeline. And they can be made up from textile as well, the temporary ones. And all of these are considered PPE because they are the anchor line for a fall rest system in the same way as the slackline works, both as the equipment that we use for the activity, but it's also the fall rest anchor if we're gonna fall. There is also a standard that incorporates these type of horizontal anchor lines. So it's called EN 795. EN 795 includes all types of anchors. In this old standard from 2012, the new one is just being voted in SEN. So 2026 there will be a new version. In this old version, we have, for example, diagrams in test methods that looks like this, which is also very similar to how we would test a highline in a dynamic performance test. And in the new standard, there is a picture of a temporary horizontal fall rest line that looks like this, also quite similar to a slackline or highline system that's going to work as a fall rest anchor. Okay, a little bit about standards. So Standards are normally not mandatory. It's quite often, especially within recreational climbing, that people think that the standard is the important bit within European legislation, because there are so many different standards for different type of products. But actually, it's always this PPE regulation that is the mandatory bit. And this is a quote that I think it describes it quite well, what a standard actually is. A standard is a common solution to a recurring problem. The purpose of standard is to create uniform and transparent procedures that we can agree on. And I think this is important regarding standards. So standards is something that's being developed outside the legislation part and outside the authorities. So for your own standards being created by the ISA, which is a non-profit organization, same with the UIAA safety standards that's been around for a very long time, being created by climbers and manufacturers together to create solutions to recurring problems. And the same goes for the European standards, the EM standards. These are being written by members from the national standard organizations, which are normally producers or user organizations or authorities that comes together, and as a common voice they develop the standards. Standards that are slightly relevant to slacklining is created in two different technical committees. One in SEN that's called TC160 that work with protection against fall from height. So that's for work equipment. That'll be any type of fall arrest or rope access equipment that's being used on a work site. And then we have TC136, which regulates sports, playgrounds, and other recreational facilities and equipment. And under that technical committee, there is a working group 5, that works with mountaineering and climbing equipment. If there would ever be a committee that's going to develop EM standards for slacklining, I would guess that that would be a separate working group under TC136. So you can see the list of working groups under TC136 to the right here. And for example, there is one for climbing walls, artificial climbing structures. There's mountain and climbing equipment, and a few others that is more normal gym equipment and stuff like that. But I think under sport and playground and recreational facilities and equipment would be the normal place to have slacklining standards if they would be written. Normally, if this type of work should be started, it's either that the industry comes together, maybe a few manufacturers from different countries come together and contact their national standard institutes and see if they can start a new working group or a new technical committee. But it could also come from authority side that's maybe will ask for a standard if there is a big gap for something. I don't know if there's something been discussed within the slackline community that to work towards European standards, but anyhow, this is how it normally looks. And then there is some global standards within ISO. For example, BG300 TC94 works with fall rest equipment for work as well, but they're not very active. So I said earlier that standards are normally not mandatory, but there is something that's called harmonized standards within European regulations. If a standard is harmonized, you can say that it conforms to the regulation that that standard is harmonized against or to. So what happens is that the European Standard Organization, SEN, developed a new standard. For example, we saw here that I said that it's going to be a new version of EN 795 coming out. So the technical committee in SEN, in this case SEN TC 160, develops that new standard. After the standard is voted and everything is more or less good to go, the European Union will decide if the standard is written in a correct way and if it includes all these basic safety aspects, the mandatory safety aspects that's relevant for the products. If everything is correct, then that standard will be harmonized by decision by the European Union. And after that, if a manufacturer wants to produce, in this case, EN 795, that will be an anchor product. If a manufacturer wants to produce an anchor, they will only test to that harmonized standard. And then it's presumed that the whole regulation is covered. So that's for the European market, that's the important part with safety standards or equipment standards, is that when they are harmonized, then you know that if it fulfills the standard, you will also fulfill everything that's needed in the regulation. But it's always the regulation that's the mandatory bit. The harmonized standard is just a shortcut to just to get to the PPE regulation, so that you know what's going to be tested. I mentioned the UI safety standards. Just shortly want to mention them in parallel, because even if we're talking slackline here, you do use quite a bit of equipment that have a background from the recreational climbing. And UI started with creating safety standards long before the European Union had their CE mark, long before the PPE regulations were in place. So the CE mark for PPE came in place in '93, I think, so quite some time ago now, but the first UI standards were 1960. Right now, there is about 25 safety standards available on UI webpage, free for everyone. And there is about 70 manufacturers that produce products to these safety standards. And there are about 2,000 safety labels that are active at this point. And Hai already talked about the ISA standards. I didn't knew he was gonna, so I just added this here as well as a reference, that we have the ISA standards since 2018. At the moment, 7 different standards, 6 manufacturers that have safety labels, and 36 products in total. But we also have national standards. So at least every European country, and I guess most countries around the globe, have their own national standard institute. It differs a lot within the European how active each country is in writing national standards, and it can also be different in different industries. But some examples, just to understand what you can see. So the obvious one is a German standard. So DIN is Deutsche Industrienorm. There is a slackline system standard, but this is not for highlines. This is for normal slacklines. So it includes requirement and test methods. other examples, there is a Swedish standard on roof safety devices. There is, for example, a British standard on anchors, normally put in concrete, system design, installation, and inspection, code of practice. So this is used in the UK. And there is a Norwegian standard regarding fall protection work at height training and execution. So all these national standards, and of course there's thousands in different industries, they only have an impact in that country. Even if the British standard on anchor systems is well written, legally it doesn't matter if it exists or not for anyone outside the UK. And the same with the DIN slackline systems. If you want to sell products in Germany, I would guess that this is mandatory. I don't know the German legislation behind it, but I would guess that you need to have this standard. But that depends on the national legislation always. So national standards is never generally mandatory. It's always through national legislation that they could become mandatory. And different countries handle this in quite different ways. Some countries choose to never reference standards in legislation. Some countries do it quite a bit. So it can be very different from country to country. The important part is the European standards or the European harmonized standards, because they refer to the European legislation regarding a group of products, for example, PPE. And to sell PPE in any European country, then it always needs to fulfill the same regulation. So a short summary. So the PPE regulation defines both the products that are made available on the market, not how you use it. So only when you put products on the market, the PPE regulation applies. There is different national regulations regarding safe use. For example, safe use at the workplace will be regulated in health and safety at work regulations, and that is national regulations. Then you'll probably have different national regulations on if you do like an organized activity, like if you do a training or you have a workshop or something, then you'll have national regulations regarding how you do that safely, and if you need to have a specific competence or specific equipment or systems in place. But anything about that is national. It's not common in the whole of Europe, so it could be quite different. But for putting equipment on the market, it's the PPE regulation that applies. It's the regulation includes all PPE, but there is vastly different demands on these different categories. So the category 3 that we talk about when it's highlining or recreational climbing, then the demands on production is very high. The definition of PPE include external device and also anchorage point, which will, in my at least in how I analyze it and see it, will include any type of temporary slackline setup where you're connected with a harness. If you're not connected with a harness, then it's not an anchorage point, and therefore it falls outside the PPE regulation. So therefore, it's also so important regarding the information from the manufacturer. If a manufacturer specifically say that this is not for highline use, then the manufacturer have described that you're not allowed to connect your leash to that line, even if maybe it's strong enough. Product standards are normally not mandatory, but national legislation can refer to a standard. And a harmonized standard are more important because they are the easy way to get to the PPE regulation and to get the CE mark on the product. Any parts that is not considered PPE, for example, anchor bolts, must instead follow the European regulation on general product safety and not the PPE regulation. It's good to know as well. That's it. Any questions or any discussion?
Thanks a lot, Per. Super interesting. Thanks for this very high-end talk on all the backgrounds of things that we need to consider. First questions are already popping up in the chat. Maybe I'm just going to start with one first question to you, and then I'm sure there's going to be many questions, and we're going to take a bit longer. But my first question would be PPE definition, temporary systems. So it's become very common practice that almost every city in Europe has a so-called perma-rig, which is a permanent highline system. You can define this in different ways, but it's basically being set up for its entire lifetime and then decommissioned after being taken down. Is that somehow also, could that also be considered PPE, or does this clearly fall outside of the PPE definition?
It's not a simple thing to answer, because, and I think this is a hard bit to bear in mind when we discuss this, is that you're directly talking about use and not product, right? So when the producer puts the equipment on the market, that is when the regulation applies. Mm-hmm. So if you can use the same product, let's say the webbing, if you can use that for temporary and the manufacturer allows it for temporary, then the product is PPE, no matter what. Even if you choose to leave it in place. Yes, and as an example, if you ever go to an indoor climbing gym, if they have stationary top ropes in place, it's very similar. You leave the top rope, you install them, and you leave them there until they are worn out. As the climbing wall owner, they will put up new ropes. When they're worn down, they throw them and put up new ones. But the material that they buy is climbing rope, and climbing rope, per definition, is PPE. I can't answer if you can get around this by saying a perma-rig equipment is for one-time use and therefore not temporary. But then the manufacturer take a big responsibility and must define that this is for this one-time permanent use. That could be a way around it, but from my side, it's very hard to answer yes or no. Yeah, but think about it as products being sold.
Yeah. So you're mentioning a super important thing. Products being sold, the manufacturer stating that, let's say, take a piece of webbing is meant for highline use. The way most manufacturers have been marketing this is that it is not for highline use. So basically, for us as a user, it's a dual use, right? We receive it as a slackline not meant for use at height, but then we go and highline with it. This is a bit contradictory, because then if you go to the manufacturer's social media, you will see mostly pictures of this webbing being used in highlines. So how do you see this general practice of, I'd say, a large amount, not all, but large amount of slackline manufacturers selling their gear as not for use above 1 meter or something like that?
So if they are clear that you may only use it without the fall risk, without connecting a leash and a harness to it, and then if I as a user do something else, then that's on me, then it's my liability for my own life. I think there is a, 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 couple of problems that we need to think about. One is the one you mentioned, that if they on their social media or other media describe and show that this is how it's used, then of course that other part is just to show that they write that you're not allowed to do it because it's obvious. So I think any legal situation, that manufacturer would have a big problem. And even more so if they had a product tested to your Slackline standards, referring to highline and Slackline systems, then of course it's even more obvious that it's going to be for a highline use. Another aspect of this is that if you're an organization providing a highline, let's say on a festival or another situation, then you should use equipment that are safe to use. And if the manufacturer says you're not allowed to use it on highline, then that will be a big impact in a legal case, I could guess. But it all comes down to national legislation on the use if you have an organized situation. So it's very hard to say something specific about that second part. But I think the first part regarding manufacturers saying one thing in their instruction for use and another thing in other medias, I think that manufacturer could be in a quite tight spot if any authorities would have a deeper look into it.
If I may interject here, we checked this with lawyers, and all our lawyers that we asked definitely said if you put some 1 meter sentence into your manual and you have pictures on your online shop where it's showcased in a highline scenario, basically you can forget this 1 meter sentence. It's worth nothing.
Yeah. And there is a question from Loven in the chat. Why highline equipment should be considered on PPE and not CPE as Adventure Park? CPE is construction products, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lawrence.
Yes, these are construction products, CPE.
Yeah. So an adventure park or rope courses, as they also called, are permanently installed with tools, and that's the big difference by the definition. So in an adventure park, your harness and your leash will add the slider that goes along the Y system are considered PPE, but actual installation is not PPE. Same goes for installed anchors on the building or on top of the machinery or something. The installed anchors are not considered PPE, but the rest of the system, the temporary part that you put there, and temporary could be for a long time. It's not defined, but that you put it up without any tools are normally considered PPE.
So we actually reference in our highline standard EN 15567, which applies to permanent and mobile ropes courses and their components. And in there, temporary is defined up to 1 week in the scope of the standard, and that's where we currently would see ourselves in this kind of category. I think that it's exactly, I think, that the same or similar question that Lothar just asked. Yeah. And the question also, like for me, it's not quite clear. You said before, well, everything that is fastened is not PPE. So, and then you mentioned a wrench. It's actually something we always use for highline rigging. Interesting little analog there. So I think this is also, especially this the fact that it is a multi-user system. I mean, it's very close to what you said. These rooftop systems that you clipped, or you showed the pictures. I think the biggest difference I see, besides that we also use a wrench, or we should use a wrench at least, is that we also always have this maintenance backup systems. Because if I kind of switch it around a bit, I could also say, okay, if I use, for example, just one EN certified CE industrial climbing rope as a backup underneath my highline, this could actually make my highline basically a valid system, just by using like one component, which is not even tensioned, very similar to how Rescue uses twin tensioned rope systems. So how do you? How would you say?
So since we're talking about products and putting on the market, we're not talking about how you build a system. So obviously it's safer with the main line and backup line as you use, but I would say that you're perfectly correct, at least how I see it, that if you have your backup system made from a climbing rope and that attached with CE certified climbing components, you're safe to go. I think the problem comes, but now we're talking about use again. And so then it comes to that the highline webbing manufacturer needs to define that if you need to be clipped in with a leash during walking, then the other system must be such and such because this system is not for fall arrest. Could be a possible solution instead of CE certifying the actual highline components. The problem is, will it be safer? Probably not. So it's always this balance between following legislation and doing the right thing that feels correct, safety-wise. Hopefully, you can do both. But yeah, I'm trying not to argue my own thoughts, but I try to analyze my view of the regulation, which is sometimes hard because sometimes it's not perfect. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, we have a question here from August in the room. Do you want to come here quickly?
Yeah.
1 second.
Yeah, hello. I was wondering what you could tell us about, if you know about the flow and the interconnection between like the national standards and what happens at the European level. So how it, because they must have like relation and they must update one another accordingly. So that's, yeah, if you can tell us anything about this.
Yeah, so the EN standard is always written by technical committees in CEN. The members in the technical committee is appointed by the National Standards Organization. So, for example, DEAN has representatives, and Norwegian standards and Swedish standards and Italian standards all have their representatives in the CEN technical committees, and that's where the EN standards are being written. But when a national standard organization, for example, DEAN or Swedish CIS or whatever, if they write a national standard, they're only allowed to write a standard that doesn't conflict with an existing EN standard. And when it's written, they need to report it to CEN that this standard is now available as, for example, a Swedish standard. And then CEN can take a decision if they want to start to work with the European version of the same standard. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, it answers the question very well. Thank you. Do you know about how much time it takes between, or well, just if you have more details. That's good.
Yeah, he just asked about the time frames between like the creation of a national standard and something maybe becoming European, or maybe.
In the areas where I work, there is almost never any national standards to start off with. We always start from scratch, or within recreational climbing, we start from the UIA standard very often. So UIA created a standard, and then CEN more or less copies that and do their thing and changes it. But for example, for the industrial use, let's say rope access or full arrest systems, then we start from scratch. Normally it takes around 4, 5, 6, 7 years to develop a standard. Also an update of an existing standard can normally take 4, maybe 5 years. There is a lot of steps. Obviously the discussion on what to include and what not to include, and how to test and so on. But then also there is quite a lot of different steps for the formal parts in voting that takes a lot of time. So quite a few years.
Yeah. Is it possible for, you said manufacturers and federations come together, and then you have the notified bodies and so on the table as well? Like, what's the minimal group that needs to come together? Can a single manufacturer start creating a standard?
No. So a standard is always created in the technical committee. So let's say if you would want a slackline standard, at the moment there is not one obvious place where that would be developed. So let's say I would be active slackliner from Sweden, and I would contact the Swedish Standard Institute, and maybe my Slackline organization would become a member of the Swedish Standard Institute. And the Swedish Standard Institute could ask this TC 136, that's sporting and recreational equipment, could ask them if there is any interest in starting a working group for slackline equipment. So there needs to be a formal question from one of the national standard institutes to send if they're going to start the work, and then there is a vote in that technical committee if they want to start the work or not. If you need to start a fully new technical committee, I don't know the procedures because I've never been involved in that in any sense, but I would guess that that's even harder. So I think the easier way is to contact either National Standard Organization or directly to TC 136 and ask if there is an interest. And of course, the more organizations that are willing to start that work and become members, the easier it would be to get a yes. I don't know the minimum of participants in the working group, but normally it's maybe 5, 6, 10 that are very active, and quite a few more that's quite passive but still members.
Yeah, interesting things. One last question from me would be, can you say something about industry size? For me, the way I see it, the slackline industry is tiny. We have maybe 10 to 15, maybe 20 full-time employees in terms of all the manufacturers around the world that produce highline gear. I'm just focusing on that right now. Sales volume is extremely small compared to anything in the climbing industry. So I would be wondering, like, can you say something about size of an industry? From what point on is such a standard even thought of? Or in other words, is there, do you know of any instances in the past where, let's say, an accident or a gear that has been not misused but actually broke has initiated such a standard?
No, sorry, nothing that I have any knowledge about.
But what would be like when you see, like, you know the climbing industry very well, and you can compare it to our industry? I mean, it's, I don't even know where to start, but it's probably a factor 500.
If you're talking about 10, 15 employees, I would say a factor of 1,000 probably.
Yeah, so a factor of 1,000 or more.
Yeah. So yeah, I fully understand that situation. How to get around that? There is not an easy solution. If you and legislator, if they get their eyes on highline systems and they do the same conclusion that I do, that many of your products are considered PPE, that could damage your sport a lot, right? And how to get around that, I think it's a very hard question, because there is no easy answer. You need some volume to get all the costs paid. That's for sure, because it's much higher cost to produce PPE according to the regulation than just to produce something safely.
Okay, thanks a lot. Answer.
Can I have a question? Sorry.
Sure, Toby, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Toby from Slacktivity, co-founder of Slacktivity. And for example, just as Thomas say, we certified this pin, Slackle Kingpin thing for EN 362 connector 3. And now in this norm, or it's quite new, maybe you can answer, Mr. This peer. We have to pay every year at least 700-800 euro for retesting it. Still, it's the same batch, but they have to retest in this category every year. And this is the amount of money we gain from this part. You got that? So,
yeah.
I mean, first question, is this just to push out the small manufacturer with this norm? Or why is it? It makes totally no sense, because it's the same batch. Why should I retest it every year and pay for this? And I mean, this is really just an example for the entire highline market. It's so small. We really nobody of us want to hurt anybody, but we have really to deal with and earn at least a bit the cost or so. I mean, from Slacktivity, we subsidize even the highline product with our other product to sustain this entire thing. Now, if you come and say, yeah, you have to certify everything for PPE, I mean, this is just not realistic. And we have, what do you say about this?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I tried to give this presentation on my evaluation of the regulation, not my view of the regulation. And I really see a struggle, like I see the problem. But how I see it, the regulation doesn't care about volumes or if it's effective. It only cares about this is the minimum safety level. It applies on all types of PPE. It doesn't matter if you're going to produce 10 or 10 million of the same item, the regulation is the same. But I want to add just one thing, that annual cost that you have, that is not the standard. That's within the PPE regulation. And the PPE regulation doesn't define the cost either. They define the quality control system. And then you as a manufacturer need to go to the notified body that will control you as a manufacturer. And that's where the cost is. So the cost is not directly for the regulation, and it has nothing to do with the standard. It has something to do with the quality control method that is mandatory for PPE category 3. But
indirect, you do it still, because you say the notified body, you have to test it every year. So,
yeah. That's just how the regulation is. So
just to give another example,
if I just could add, maybe this is light outside, but the regulation applies when you put the product on the market. So if you would have another company to produce 1,000 of these shackles, and you sell them all at once to your own company, that then is the distributor. Then for 4 years you don't produce any, then you don't pay that 700 euros or whatever you said for those years.
Whoa.
Maybe it's possible. I don't know. I'm not a businessman.
Okay, thanks around that.
But it might be possible.
Okay. Very interesting.
From what I see, you can also do some in-house testing after the NX, I think it's called C2, and you can go to your CE notified body and hand them like weekly or monthly test results that you may be produced on a DAX accredited machine or something like this. That's what I'm going to do over here now. We went into the climbing business with the belay resistor devices, and we have the new generation of belay resistor devices CE certified now. And what I came to agreement with the CE notified body with is that we install a DAX accredited testing machine in our own site. And we weekly or monthly test of each production batch one sample, document this, send this to the CE notified body to reduce the cost of them doing that.
Yeah, so this is now getting quite in depth of the different regulations on different categories. But as I mentioned in the presentation, that during the production phase there is 2 versions that you could do, and one, as you mentioned, is the C2 module, but that one is the D module. So it depends on how the notified body does the quality control during production. But your notified body will help you with that to get more knowledge, or you can read in the PPE regulation yourself.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
No.
You go first, please.
There was one more question in the chat.
Yeah, that's coming from me, and I think there's another one from Johan.
Yeah, the Johan one. Maybe I missed yours. Okay, you go first.
Can you think of any type of PPE that is sold by a manufacturer where the manufacturer instructs the user to produce a piece of kit for this PPE at home that is installed into this system to make the whole system work in a total? Can you think of any type of homemade gear to make any PPE work?
No, I can't see that happen. Can you specify what do you mean?
Right now we have the situation that we have webbings. Webbings have end termination soon loops, and we have the situation that there's a technique coming up. It's called grok splices. End users have the option to splice a connector to connect 2 end loops of webbings to create a segmented highline. Maybe you have 1,000 meters of highline, you have only 100 meter segments. In the case of a failure, you don't fall too deep. You have to connect these segments. And one of the techniques that came up by the community is to splice connectors with rope that you bought, spliceable rope, like 12-strand Dyneema rope. And you splice them basically at home or on site to connect the segments in this load-bearing or people-bearing system.
Yeah, so that will, for me, that will be quite strange if you have a line that's life-supporting PPE certified and correct. Then, of course, if you need an intermediate connection, like a soft shackle or whatever, that of course needs to be a PPE certified product as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So it needs to be one of the activity shackles or a connector, but obviously you don't want anything metal. So then you need CE certified spliceable equipment. There's a lot of splices certified within our arborist industry, so of course it's doable.
Yeah, I talked to the manufacturer.
To my knowledge, there is no 12-strand Dyneema that is CE certified. I can't see that's really possible.
Okay, thanks a lot. We're already quite over time, but I think this was an interesting discussion to have. Thanks so much, Per. I am referencing to a talk that Ed wanted to give later on today, and he just told me that I think he contacted you. I'm not sure. Are you going to hold it? He said you might hold the talk later, and if not, we're going to record it some other day with him because he's stuck at work. He just wrote me.
No, sorry, I can't because I really need to run off to work myself.
No worries, no worries.
It was the plan if I were coming in person, then I could be part of it, but now I can't. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. thanks so much for your time and answering those questions. And I'm sure it's not going to be the last time we have you at one of our events. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you about these things. Thank you very much for your
thank you.
And thanks so much. So
yeah,
next,
thank you. Thank you. Hope I see you guys another time. Bye.
Bye bye. Thanks, Pip.